16 scientists failed, but the secretary's amazing 3-minute solution revealed an incredible secret. As Emma Lawson sat at her cluttered desk, the cool glow of the computer screen lit her face, but it did nothing to warm the chill that settled deep within her heart. 16 brilliant scientists' names whispered in veneration across the walls of the prestigious biomedical research lab had come together in a rigorous hunt for a cure. Yet, day after day, they met with only despair, leaving the community hanging by a thread, caught in a cruel game of hope and loss. Underneath the sterile lights and high expectations, Emma felt the weight pressing down. She was merely the secretary, underestimated and unnoticed, yet, within her, a storm brewed, a storm of unspoken knowledge, buried insights, and a desperate hope to save her father. As her fingers danced over the keyboard today, the click-clack sounded like the countdown of her father's days. The truth was heavy, he was among the many battling the cruel disease that had swept through their small town. Emma's dedication to her role often eclipsed her own grief, but today, the burden felt unbearable. The familiar ache roared back, making her stomach churn as fear tangled with anger. How could they ignore the urgency? How could they overlook the common struggles around them? As she buried her emotions beneath stacks of reports, her mind raced through possibilities: her father's laughter, his stories of their precious family history, slipping through her fingers like sand. Then her gaze fell upon a dusty folder, wedged between 2 thick tomes of research. Curiosity sparked, and she felt her heart quicken as she pulled it out, the musty scent filling her nostrils like a long-lost memory. Inside, scattered but coherent notes burst with unrefined ideas penned in the margins, insights forgotten by the minds who thought they held all the answers. Emma's pulse quickened. Could this be a breakthrough? A narrowing of the impossible gap between her father's past and the future of her community? This was her chance to make a dent in the perception of her place in this world. With a determined breath, she stormed into her boss's office, the notes clutched tight in her palms. But the authority figure barely glanced up, dismissing her presence with a wave of his hand, insisting that she should know her place. The words sent a jolt through her, igniting a fire of resentment that simmered under the surface. Who decided who held the knowledge worth listening to? As she retreated, nausea twisted in her gut. Fear battled with defiance. If she spoke out, would they vilify her or ridicule her? If she remained silent, would she condemn her father to endless suffering? Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. The dread slithered back into her mind, each breath a reminder of the risk she was considering. Her father's illness gnawed at her confidence, repulsing thoughts of possible failure. Could she muster the courage to stand before those who had dismissed her? Could she speak passionately about a theory unrecognized by their collective genius? Emma's heart raced, a tumult of emotions intertwining her love for her father, the bitterness of being overlooked, and the desperate hope of possibly doing something impactful. In a moment of overwhelming vulnerability, she prepared to speak out. Standing at the front of the lab, she faced her colleagues, their eyes filled with skepticism. She gripped her notes tightly, calculated words spilling into the silence. Inspired by her father's forgotten wisdom, she turned those pages of jotted ideas into a lifeline for all who suffered. As she spoke, she sensed the tension shift, the momentum beginning to swell, but then she caught the glower of her boss in the corner, ready to deflate her moment entirely. The tension thickened, hanging like fog in the chilly air. Would they finally listen? Would her conviction find space to breathe? Emma's resolve hardened, yet uncertainty engulfed her. The air crackled with anticipation, the burden of her family legacy promising a fierce battle ahead. As doubt crept in, the shocking revelation that threatened to uproot everything loomed ever closer. Would she lose her voice forever in the fight against years of silence? The struggle to prove herself and save her father had just begun. Emma's pulse thundered against her ears as she stood in front of the scientists, their skepticism weighing heavily on her shoulders. The pit of her stomach tightened with an urgency that threatened to choke off her words. Each second stretched out, drawing her deeper into self-doubt. As her colleagues exchanged glances, some were puzzled, others silently judging. In that moment, she felt an inexplicable pressure to validate her existence in this scientific world, a world that had always left her lingering in the shadows. Breathlessly, she summarized her findings, the notes illuminating her vision, but with every word she spoke, the specter of dismissal loomed large. Had she made a grave mistake by bringing this forward? Was she truly onto something substantial, or merely grasping at straws born from desperation? Internally, she clung to her father's unwavering spirit, the man who had taught her the value of tenacity, an unwritten code that propelled her forward. As Emma articulated her point, fragments of her father's stories floated through her mind, the late-night conversations about science and humanity intertwining with her present turmoil. These notes mattered. Her heart asserted it while her mind played a cruel game of confrontation. Fighting for acceptance held perilous stakes. Would they valorize her insight, or would they crush it before it could take flight? The lab's director finally broke the silence. "Emma," he said, his tone dripping with condescension, "this is all well and good, but scientific theory demands more than anecdotal musings. We need empirical data. We're not running a book club here." The sting of his dismissal struck harder than she anticipated. The walls of her confidence shuddered, but she couldn't let fragile validation defeat her. Instead, fury ignited a powerful resolve. Data, she reminded herself, could not overshadow the importance of human experience. With a newfound fortitude, she countered his assertion. But empirical data often stems from unexplored ideas. Innovation happens when we allow ourselves to think beyond what's already known. What if the insights I've gathered could lead to the very data you seek? The words poured out almost defiantly. In this rebuke, she recognized the stirrings of an unexpected strength. She had spoken, and the questions that plagued her formed a rallying cry within. The shift in energy was palpable. Some of the scientists began to lean in, curiosity replacing outright skepticism. She could feel the tide of their attention starting to turn, but her boss's icy stare remained resolute, threatening to snuff out her light. Frustration mingled with resolve. Emma could not let him hijack this moment. Her father's fight for life demanded more than silence. Pushing onward, she proposed a meeting where they could delve into her notes together. Perhaps there lay the connection her father needed, a breakthrough that transcended the limits of their preconceived notions. With every pitch she made, fragments of a vision formed clearer in her mind, one where she could bridge her own narrative with that of her father's treatment. That night, she returned home, a mix of exhaustion and determination flooding her thoughts. The faint glow from her writing desk beckoned her, reminding her of the notes, the letter of her father's legacy intertwined with her newfound purpose. As she scribbled down her thoughts, Emma recognized a profound transformation within herself. What began as an act of desperation now coursed through her as a burning ambition. She would not only fight for her father's life but the lives of many others who were ignored. Yet a lurking fear remained. What if her push for acknowledgement ignited even more backlash? What if her voice, fierce and undeterred, prompted retaliation from those to whom she had exposed her vulnerabilities? The journey ahead felt daunting, yet thrilling. Unbeknownst to Emma, just as she began to build her path forward, an unexpected ally was watching from the shadows, contemplating the potential in her words. What they would reveal remained uncertain, but as the moon cast its light through her window, Emma knew she was ready for whatever came next. With her heart pounding like a drum in her chest, she prepared for a confrontation that could reshape her life forever. The moment of truth beckoned, and she could almost hear the echoes of her father urging her to embrace every challenge head-on. What could she unearth in her quest for answers? Would she realize her own power before it was too late? Emma awoke with the dawn, the morning light spilling gently into her room, the soft beams catching the remnants of the night's thoughts swirling in her mind. Steeling herself, she rose to confront a day that felt heavier than usual. Today, she would lay the foundations of a new plan, determined to reclaim the narrative of her father's legacy with a boldness that had only recently ignited within her. In the confines of her small kitchen, she poured herself a cup of coffee, the comforting aroma inviting visions of clarity, solutions layered upon her scattered notes. As she flipped through her findings, she saw threads of possibility woven throughout. The words began to blur, morphing into a vision that felt increasingly tangible. Empirical data was the currency of her peers, but Emma realized she needed to approach them from an entirely different angle. What if she reframed her ideas in terms that appealed to their ambitions? She would create a tangible experiment, a series of hypotheses directly stemming from her father's treatment, turning potential critiques into opportunities for collaboration. Her notes transformed from mere reflections of her frustrations into installments of a compelling thesis. Emma grabbed her notebook and began sketching. She feverishly drafted a project proposal infused with the empirical rigor required to captivate the scientists who had dismissed her. Every realization felt like a shard of glass cutting through her previous self-doubts. She was capable of presenting her ideas as innovations rather than mere musings. But as she melded creativity with scientific inquiry, a shadow of doubt rushed back like an old friend. Could she truly lead a project while under scrutiny? The prospect of further confrontational discussions with the lab director loomed like a dark cloud. Yet, she was determined not to let trepidation hold her back. Time to confront the very person who had cast her into doubt. As the hours bled into the day, she gathered her materials and made her way back to the lab. Each step was fueled by an amalgamation of fear and fierce determination, like a storm brewing within her. She could hear her father's words echo in her mind, "Do it afraid." Thrusting herself into uncomfortable situations was a part of growth. To her surprise, when she entered the lab, the atmosphere had shifted perceptibly. Her colleagues were engaged in animated discussions, a productive tension that felt imbued with the promise of new ideas. She took a deep breath, pushing aside reservations, ready to stake her claim. "Can I have your attention for a moment?" Emma's voice rang out, steady despite the racing of her heart. The lab director raised an eyebrow, but there was a flicker of intrigue as the others turned to her, a collective curiosity forming. She took it as a sign of support. With poise, she presented her proposal, channeling every scrap of passion and fervor she poured into the project outline. As she spoke, she saw the shift in her colleagues' expressions. What began as skepticism slowly gave way to interest. They engaged with her ideas, asking questions that veered into innovative territory she hadn't even considered. Emma felt empowered. Each interaction sparked a dynamic dialogue, chipping away at the walls of previous reluctance. But the path remained fraught with hazards. The director still lingered in the backdrop, a storm warning when she least expected it. "You can't just assert these connections without the groundwork being laid. Pointing at a trend doesn't mean it will yield results," he interjected, his words steeped in condescension. "Trying new approaches has always been rooted in risk," Emma volleyed back, the fire within her unwilling to be extinguished. "But the real risk lies in ignoring what could be on the verge of discovery." Their eyes locked, and she could almost hear the echoes of her heart pounding in time with her resolve. Emma refused to back down, molding herself into a conduit for change amid this battlefield of intellect and authority. As the day turned, she realized that the battle was not just against her colleagues' skepticism but also a confrontation with her fears. With every question posed and every theory challenged, she chipped away at the suffocating shell that had held her back for too long. But just as a sense of victory began to settle in, a sudden announcement crackled through the intercom. A visiting scientist was arriving soon, a heavyweight with a reputation for dismantling flawed theories. Would this be the moment that tested her newfound resolve? Would she rise to the challenge, or would old ghosts from her past creep back in, threatening to shatter her hard-earned confidence? One thing was clear, Emma's journey had only just begun. As she braced for the uncertainty ahead, she felt the weight of her father's legacy driving her forward. Now, the stakes were rising, and Emma knew that each decision would reverberate far beyond her own aspirations. What awaited her next? Emma spent the night restless, her mind tumbling through every possible scenario surrounding the imminent visit of the renowned scientist. The specter of the intercom's announcement haunted her, twisting her thoughts into a tapestry of fear and anticipation. Despite the tangible momentum she'd gained earlier in the lab, doubt crept in like a thief in the night, stealthily stripping away her confidence. As dawn broke once again, she sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by a fortress of papers and anxious energy. Every word she had written the day before buzzed in her mind, yet the weight of her father's spirit felt heavier, like an anchor she could neither cast off nor embrace fully. She had to get it right. There would be no second chances in front of a critic known for his incisive follies. Determined to regain her footing, Emma took a moment to meditate on what she believed in, her father's pioneering work and her own emerging voice. She visualized that moment in the lab when she had stood, unwavering, confronting skepticism head-on, and she knew she could replicate that strength. She began outlining her key arguments again, polishing each point until it gleamed with clarity. Arriving at the lab, the atmosphere crackled with apprehension. She was greeted by colleagues whispering in huddles, undoubtedly speculating about the visiting scientist's potential impact on their work. As Emma navigated through the thrumming energy, she reminded herself of the warmth of collective purpose, urging her to stay grounded. When the front door swung open and the visiting scientist entered, silence enveloped the room. He exuded an air of authority, his gaze slicing through the tension as he assessed the gathered group like a seasoned general surveying his troops. Emma felt exposed under his scrutiny, but she anchored herself to the knowledge she possessed, breathing deeply to summon the courage she needed. Not long after his arrival, he began to question their methodologies, incisively dissecting their approaches with surgical precision. The tension in the room escalated, and Emma's heart raced. She caught snippets of conversation that pitted her peers against one another, their defenses unraveling in the face of his critiques. The director appeared particularly frazzled, a flashing unpredictability at the helm of the storm. Emma recognized this was her moment. She took a steadying breath, forcing herself to rise from her seat, even as every cell in her body screamed to retreat. The astonished faces of her colleagues ignited a flicker of familiarity in her resolve. Inspired by my father's research, she began, her voice steady yet passionate. We explored novel methodologies to address previously unconsidered variables impacting our results. She saw the scientist lean in, arching an eyebrow as though intrigued by the challenge. Then the questions began, flying toward her like arrows. But how do you validate your findings against established parameters? He queried, his tone dangerously condescending. Emma felt the heat of his words, but she fought against being swept away in self-doubt. By incorporating both qualitative perspectives from anecdotal evidence and empirical data, she replied, her voice growing stronger as she navigated through her thought process. With each word, she witnessed understanding emerging in her colleagues' eyes, her passion kindling a shared hope. Yet, the scientist was unrelenting. But what if you're merely assembling fragments of a puzzle that doesn't fit? 8 different methods have failed before you, what makes you believe yours won't? Could she hold her ground? Suddenly, the question felt like a personal challenge. This was not merely a debate about science, it was about her journey, her father's legacy, and the truth she felt keenly inside. I believe innovation surfaces precisely where traditional methods have stumbled, Emma asserted, her voice quaking slightly but igniting with confidence. Rediscovering what's overlooked often yields the most impactful results, and dismissing it before we even begin compromises. The very spirit of discovery. As she delivered her final words, feeling emboldened, there was a pause in the room, a shift in the air that felt almost palpable. She scanned her colleagues' faces, reading the mix of surprise and admiration reflected back. It was as if she had summoned an invisible thread binding them all together. The scientist's expression morphed into an inscrutable mask, a flicker of recognition crossed his features, yet he remained noncommittal. Frustration fluttered in Emma's chest as she anticipated his dismissal or, worse, outright ridicule. But what if her words had found their mark? With the room still holding its breath, Emma sensed the looming moment of truth. The fight for her voice had started, and she wouldn't be silenced. She would have to prepare for whatever response came next, bracing for the consequences in pursuing her father's legacy. Could she withstand the storm that was surely about to unfold? The silence broke as the visiting scientist finally spoke, his voice laced with skepticism. Your enthusiasm is commendable, but enthusiasm alone cannot replace evidence. What metrics do you have to support your hypothesis? Without that, you stand on shaky ground. The room tightened around her, a cocoon of vulnerability that made Emma acutely aware of her heartbeat. She could feel the heat rising in her cheeks, self-doubt tugged at her ankles, threatening to pull her down. Yet, as she fought to anchor herself in the moment, she recalled her father's unwavering belief in the unconventional. "I'm working on developing a new set of metrics that reflects more than just the data. It accounts for anomalies that previous models ignored," she countered, her voice steady despite the growing tension. The scientist crossed his arms, leaning back into his chair as if her words were a feeble challenge. "Anomalies are often the result of errors, not insights," he said, taunting her with a dismissive wave of his hand. "You might overlook the fundamentals of our discipline." With those words, Emma felt a pit open in her stomach, echoing the nagging fears she'd battled through sleepless nights. This was her moment to pivot, to either retreat in the face of criticism or to confront him with a clearer purpose. She took a deep breath and embraced the momentum building within her once more. What if we are the ones missing the point? Emma pressed, glancing around to see if her colleagues were paying attention. Recognizing failure is important, but equally essential is understanding what that failure teaches us. We can't allow ourselves to be cowed by it. The passionate fire in her words kindled a spark around the room. Heads began to nod in reluctant agreement, and she felt their hope radiating back to her. The tension in the atmosphere seemed to shift as her colleagues stirred, some murmuring amongst themselves. Was the seed of belief finally taking root? But just as she dared to hope, the scientist leaned forward, scrutinizing her closely. "Bold words, Emma. But aspirations do not hold water. Give me one solid reason to believe your hypothesis is more than just a dream." "Your father's legacy cannot be your shield in this discussion," he challenged, almost jeering. In that instant, Emma sensed an unraveling, a challenge not just against her methodology, but against her worth, her identity. Searing anger mixed with an unyielding desire to prove herself surged in her veins. "Because my father inspired me to never settle for the boundaries set by others," she snapped, her pulse quickening. "His failures taught me how to think outside of rigid frameworks." Emma felt the weight of those words transform into something powerful. Framed amid sheer conviction, she addressed her audience directly. "To innovate is to embrace risks. We need to dare to consider paths unexplored, and we must collaborate to reshape our understanding of success." The tension shifted palpably, her colleagues leaning forward, their collective energy buoying her resolve. The scientist's expression wavered slightly, a mixture of intrigue and irritation written across his features. In that moment, Emma recognized she was not only defending her research but also staking a claim in her professional identity, challenging an establishment steeped in conformity. She felt exhilaration intertwine with anxiety. She was no longer merely her father's daughter, but a voice demanding to be counted among the influential. Would this be enough to persuade others? What lay beyond this confrontation? The moment stretched, she stood at the precipice of transformation. The eyes watching her now held an electric charge, each glance mixing apprehension with intrigue. Would the scientist relent, or would he continue to weave a web of doubt? As Emma braced herself for his next response, the challenge hung thick in the air. This was not merely a professional debate, it was the pivotal moment in her emergence. Could she influence the direction of her career, reshape expectations, and reclaim her father's legacy? The answer remained ensconced within uncertainty, hanging like a thread, teasing the possibility of something groundbreaking. But before she could settle into her newfound resolve, a piercing question lingered on her lips: will he see me as a legitimate force, or simply dismiss me again? Emma felt the tension in the room deepen as her challenger continued to assess her with a pointed gaze, unyielding like a granite statue. The silence suffocated, rendering time almost irrelevant. It was as if every tick of the clock resonated with her heartbeat, pounding louder than before. "Your father may have been a visionary," he finally said, drawing out each word as though sampling them for poison. "But legacy can often be a heavy burden. You risk carrying his failures into your own work." A flicker of pain shot through her, piercing the armor she'd just begun to forge around herself. The echoes of self-doubt she thought she had silenced began to murmur again. Yet, she had to stand firm, she could not back down with her colleagues leaning in, poised on the edge of belief. If I were to fear the burden of his failures, then I wouldn't honor his vision, she replied, urgency infusing her tone. I choose to confront the past, to learn from it instead of letting it shackle me. The scientist's brow furrowed, twisting a lip in skepticism. But doubt was an ephemeral foe, it could be confronted and reframed. Emma knew she needed more than a spark of passion, she had to ground her words with action, to present something credible. Taking a step back from the immediate confrontation, Emma devised her approach. Her mind raced towards the labyrinth of her research, the anomalies she'd catalogued over countless late nights. Those unexpected data points, the whispered hints of potential interruptions in existing models, were her allies. I've gathered additional data examining anomalies from various case studies. If you give me time, I can lay out the evidence that supports my hypothesis. The room responded with a shift, colleagues began to show glimmers of interest. She felt their collective attention reigniting, cautious yet intrigued. Let us see this additional evidence, then, the scientist replied, his tone less mocking but still guarded. It's in the development stage, but I can share preliminary findings. She sensed a lightness in herself. The journey of articulation transformed from a footpath strewn with doubt into a solid walkway constructed of determination and clarity. Instead of viewing anomalies as outliers, what if we considered them windows into uncharted territory? These deviations could illuminate entirely new avenues for exploration. Buzzing excitement sparked in the room, and Emma captured that energy, allowing it to swell within her. Could this be the pivotal tsunami of support she had sought? The following hours were a whirlwind. Emma meticulously laid out her preliminary findings on slides as her colleagues leaned in, scrutinizing data and reflecting on its implications. She saw thick brows furrow, thoughtful expressions bloom, and occasionally, a spark of recognition flash across faces. They were beginning to see the value in what she presented. With each new piece of evidence she connected, certainty seeped further into her core. She was staving off doubt, bolstering her identity as a scientist in her own right. Presenting her work was not just an affirmation of her hypotheses, it became a catalyst for reinvention. Yet that night, even as she basked in a budding sense of triumph, a nagging discomfort stirred within. Was she merely building upon the ashes of her father's legacy? Or was she sculpting her own identity, one that would stand independent in the scientific community? As doubt circled back to her, another challenge loomed. In pursuit of deeper validation, she needed to engage directly with the visiting scientist and peel apart his skepticism layer by layer. Armed with resolve, she realized the dance of challenge wasn't over yet. It had merely begun a new movement. Emma prepared herself to confront him again, fueled not just by her father's past but by her growing belief in her own capabilities. The moment had arrived for her to step forward, but would she have the fortitude to face him head-on? Her breath went shallow as the next dilemma gripped her. Was she ready to risk everything for the sake of her beliefs? Emma paced the small space of her office, the walls closing in with every moment as anxiety twisted around her thoughts. Each slide she had prepared glared at her, demanding validation. Her hand brushed the stack of research papers on her desk, and she felt the weight of promising potential coupled with her father's expectations. Today would be different. She resolved to approach the visiting scientist, an opportunity to dissect his skepticism and perhaps forge a reciprocal understanding. This could be the key to transforming her theoretical arguments into something solid. But would she have the courage to navigate his layers of doubt? Gathering her notes, she clutched them tightly, feeling the texture of ambition coursing through her fingertips. The meeting disrupted her thoughts, a looming ripple in her neatly organized plans. Was she prepared to confront a dynamic intellect that dared to dissect her vulnerabilities? It was easy to envision the scientific arena as a battlefield, each mind wielding formidable weapons, logic, experience, and the cold evaluation of credibility. And yet there she stood, feeling the defensive instinct rise to protect her work, her identity. The soft knock on her door pulled her from her reverie. With a deep breath, she opened it, finding Dr. Lucas Crane, the very embodiment of her uncertainty. He stepped inside, his tall stature radiating confidence. Behind his polished exterior lay a mind trained to scrutinize, to challenge, and that alone stirred a flutter of fear. "Emma," he greeted her with a nod, his eyes scanning the disarray of her desk. "You wanted to discuss the presentation. I found your shift in approach intriguing." "Thank you for being open to that," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "I believe the data can provide a new lens to view our field's anomalies, and I want to demonstrate how they can lead us toward breakthroughs instead of being dismissed as errors." She gestured toward the slides, inviting him to engage rather than allowing him to dissect her purpose. "Let us start with the most compelling case study," she suggested, her pulse quickening. As she spoke, she felt a blend of vulnerability and authority, allowing the story of her research to unravel, explaining each anomaly with precision and passion. His silence was intense, but she could detect the nuances of his thought process as he leaned forward. She took that as a small victory, a sign that he was considering her words. "Interesting," he finally said, his brow furrowing thoughtfully. "You're suggesting that perhaps these anomalies offer deeper insights rather than invalidate our models?" "Yes," she affirmed, sensing an opening. "What if we interpret them as additional narratives begging to be explored, rather than repressed?" Dr. Crane's expression shifted, a hint of curiosity sparking in his eyes. "That's a compelling angle, but it would mean revising a considerable amount of existing framework." "Exactly. That's why this conversation is crucial," she pressed, feeling her conviction rise. "It's not just about defending my findings, it's about pushing the boundaries of what we thought was possible in our discipline." For a moment, Emma dared to think he might see her evolution not just as a reflection of her father's shadow but as an independent journey forged in authenticity and resilience. Yet, just as hope flickered in her chest, his gaze hardened. "But every revision comes with scrutiny and resistance. Do you think you can withstand that?" Fear prickled at her skin, but determination flooded in its place. "I may stumble, but I refuse to falter. It's my work, my responsibility to fight for it." There was silence, a heartbeat suspended in the air. Emma realized this was an agonizing moment of vulnerability. She was stripped bare before a critic who could define her trajectory in this field. "Very well," he said finally, his voice low but steady. "Let us explore this together, but I will demand the best from you. Can you handle that?" A thrill washed over her, igniting a fervor she hadn't fully grasped until now. "I can. I will." With that, they convened, a dance of ideas, challenges, and breakthroughs taking shape. Emma understood that while Dr. Crane's scrutiny might feel oppressive, it was also an opportunity, a mirror reflecting her potential, but deeper questions began to surface. Would Dr. Crane become an ally, or would the flames of exchange merely fuel further doubt? Each challenge could either shatter her resolve or ignite an unquenchable fire within her. The stakes had soared, and now she realized that this relationship could become her crucible of transformation. As the session drew to its end, Emma felt invigorated yet apprehensive. The urge to retreat and protect her hard-fought progress loomed, but instead, she leaned into the unfamiliar energy of collaboration. Would this engagement be the beginning of a formidable alliance, or merely a stepping stone toward harsher battles ahead? The thrill of possibility hung palpably in the air, the anticipation heavy with questions that begged to be answered. Was she willing to expose herself to growth's unpredictable currents, unguarded yet hopeful in her quest for authenticity and scholarship? The following weeks morphed into a relentless torrent of ideas and inquiries. Each interaction with Dr. Crane peeled back layers of complexity she had previously avoided. Yet, with every breakthrough, a creeping unease nudged her thoughts. Was she truly prepared for the whirlwind of scrutiny and collaboration that loomed ahead? Emma immersed herself in research, determined to produce a proposal that would withstand Dr. Crane's unforgiving intellect. The late evenings bled into early mornings, and caffeine became her constant companion. There was a strange exhilaration in the pressure, a feeling reminiscent of standing on a precipice ready to leap into the unknown. But with exhilaration came doubt. Could she sustain this rhythm? Would her ambitions crumble under the weight of criticism, Dr. Crane had become more than a critic, he was her mentor, someone who ignited her intellectual curiosity and pushed her past the boundaries of her confidence. Yet, his unwavering standards often felt impossible to meet. Each time she presented her findings, she braced herself for the intellectual sparring match that followed. Questions twisted like knives, sharp and relentless. Why should we care about these anomalies? How can you prove they matter? The undercurrent of skepticism was a testament to her growing dependence on his affirmation. One Friday afternoon, as she prepared for another round of discussions, she sat reviewing her notes, each bullet point a reflection of her mounting anxiety about validation. The room felt stifling, the once comforting scent of paper and ink now an ominous omen of failure. Focus, she muttered to herself, but the insecurity loomed. In that moment of desperation, she recalled her father's voice, the quiet disapproval hidden in his accolades. It takes more than just intelligence, Emma. It takes courage to challenge accepted norms. Would he acknowledge her progress now? Could she truly forge her path? With that thought, her resolve crystallized. She wouldn't simply defend her research, she intended to revolutionize it. Shaping anomalies into compelling narratives, she would arm herself with a story that demanded recognition. She clicked through her slides, infusing every word with authenticity, no longer shackled by fear of judgment. When she stepped into the conference room next Tuesday, Emma felt a shift within her. The weight of expectation had transformed into a mantle of confidence. As she began her presentation, she read Dr. Crane's face, gauging his reactions like a seasoned strategist. His brow remained furrowed at times, but there were moments when curiosity flickered in his gaze, a testament to her growing prowess. "Emma, your hypothesis is intriguing," he said midway, leaning forward as she supplemented her arguments with new data. "But you must prepare for the inevitable backlash from the traditionalists in your field." "Then I'll prepare thoroughly," she replied, fueled by determination. "I will articulate not just the science, but the impact it will have on our understanding of those anomalies." He regarded her for a moment, an inscrutable expression clouding his features. "You're suggesting they offer transformative pathways, not just theoretical farces?" "Exactly," she affirmed, pausing to reinforce her statement. "I'm proposing an evolution in our understanding, a narrative shift that embraces these stories instead of discarding them." A flicker of approval passed across his expression, yet the underlying caution remained. "But can you face the resistance that comes with such radical perspectives?" Emma felt the challenge course through her. With clarity, she responded, "I've come too far to turn back now. I've embraced my past, and that has forged my voice. I'm ready for the consequences, whatever they may be." Dr. Crane nodded, a new respect evident in his demeanor. But with that approval ignited a chase. The exhilarating pursuit for broader acceptance of her work now loomed on the horizon. Would her colleagues embrace these radical shifts? Or would she once again face isolation against the current of convention? Her heart raced as she prepared for the upcoming conference. This was a test she had to endure. Would she be able to bear witness to this evolution of thought, taking her place not just as a contributor but as a pioneer willing to defy norms? The anxiety surged anew. Questions carved into her mind like a deep crack in a fragile wall. What if her propositions met fierce resistance? What if the voices of dissent drowned out her aspirations? Was she prepared to stand firm in her beliefs, even if her peers rebuffed her? As she took a deep breath, readying herself for the next step on this precarious journey, she felt the weight of uncertainty wrapped around her like a cloak. The impulse to retreat whispered temptations of safety, but within, a fierce determination pushed her forward. The time had come to face the storm. Would she emerge as the scholar she aspired to be, or would doubt engulf her once more? Emma clenched her fists, bracing herself to confront not only the future but also the very essence of who she was becoming. This was more than professional growth, it was a personal odyssey, and she was ready to dive deeper into the unknown. In the days leading up to the conference, Emma found herself oscillating between confidence and apprehension. Each morning as sunlight poured through her window, igniting her ambitions anew, yet cast shadows where doubt took root. Staring at her reflection, she often questioned her own capabilities. The woman in the mirror was both fortified and fragile, a scholar poised to break barriers while simultaneously teetering on the edge of self-doubt. She spent hours dissecting her findings, tirelessly scripting her arguments with the precision of a surgeon. The stakes had never felt higher. Emma mentally rehearsed her presentation, envisioning both the applause of supportive colleagues and the scowls of dissenters. What she had initially seen as a unifying vision now felt like a minefield, every step forward riskier than the last. That in countless conversations with Dr. Crane, she had learned to listen intently, to recognize the nuances of critique wrapped in compliments. However, postulating her theories to a broader audience presented an entirely different realm of challenge. How would she present her work? Would she find that perfect blend of passion and professionalism? How could she persuade skeptics without appearing brash or insecure? She discovered a newfound desire to not just answer questions but to provoke them. The realization struck deep: if she could elicit curiosity instead of merely garnishing approval, her research would have the ripple effect she had envisioned. An inkling of strategy sparked within her. She would turn the conference into a dialogue rather than a presentation. It was an invitation to her audience to embark on this intellectual journey with her, not just as spectators but as equals. The night before the conference, she spread her materials across the living room floor, methodically arranging her slides. Yet, despite her meticulous preparations, sleep eluded her. The ticking clock mounted psychological pressure. As the hour approached midnight, Emma could no longer bear the silence. She picked up the phone and dialed her mother, seeking that familiar voice that grounded her. "Mom, you know all those times you told me to speak up? Well, tomorrow is my moment. But what if they shut me down? What if they don't believe in me? You've always been the strongest one in this family, Emma. Strength isn't about never feeling scared or unsure. It's about showing up even if you are." Her mother's words floated in the air, a warm embrace that shielded her from encroaching fears. Emma hung up and stared into her darkened living room. Would she show up for herself, for this dream she was chasing? When the conference day arrived, the adrenaline coursed through her veins. The auditorium buzzed with the chatter of participants, and the room was filled with brilliant minds, many of whom had decades of accolades and research behind them. Emma's heart pounded as she stepped onto the stage. She took a deep breath, not just at the prospect of speaking, but at confronting the legacy of knowledge that surrounded her. As she spoke, Emma felt the momentum shift in the room. She shared her findings using real-life narratives, the stories behind the anomalies. She focused on weaving her research into a compelling narrative, drawing in her audience's empathy and curiosity. Each question she encountered was met with assurance rather than quavering uncertainty. Then came the moment she dreaded, the QA session. Dr. Crane stood among the inquisitors, his expression unreadable. As he posed his challenge, a question that would have once sliced through her confidence, Emma's mind swirled with possibilities. Would this be the moment? She faltered, but she didn't back down. In a flash of intuition, she addressed the room with conviction, presenting snippets of data that underscored her argument while inviting alternatives to be explored. The audience shifted, intrigued rather than antagonistic. Her unyielding stance drew them in, and for the first time, she felt their attention shifting from skepticism to engagement. As she concluded and stepped down from the stage, a whirlwind of exhilaration and shock inhaled her breath. She had transformed an insurmountable fear into a remarkable triumph, but there was no time to revel in victory. The applause was both an acknowledgement and an omen of what was to come. Exiting the hall, Emma spotted Dr. Crane making his way toward her. The weight of his presence loomed large, and she braced herself. Would he affirm her breakthrough or dissect her approach? A lifetime of learning stood before her in that moment, and the stakes had never felt higher. In his gaze, she searched for validation, but wouldn't it also require her to articulate the foundation she was now standing upon? Emma faced the myriad of emotions thrumming in her chest: anticipation, anxiety, and an insatiable hunger for affirmation. Would she rise above doubt again, or would this encounter redefine her path? The hallway echoed as footsteps closed in around her, and she prepared to confront the very essence of what it meant to stand her ground in a relentless pursuit of understanding. In the days following the conference, the whirlwind of recognition swept through the lab, and with it, Emma felt an exhilarating surge of empowerment. The applause had been a tangible testament to her transformation, a validation that resonated with her father's legacy and her own burgeoning identity. Gone were the lingering shadows of self-doubt, replaced by a solid conviction that she belonged at the table of scholars rather than relegated to the margins. Emma meticulously analyzed the feedback she received after her presentation. Colleagues who once harbored skepticism now approached her for discussions, intrigued by her approach to anomalies as pathways rather than pitfalls. The tide had turned, not solely in perception but in her own self-acceptance. Engaging in deep conversations and collaborative brainstorming sessions, she felt her ideas ripple outward, fostering innovation that promised to reshape the parameters of their field. Furthermore, the director's dismissive demeanor had shifted. Emma saw respect in his eyes as he began to reference her findings in their staff meetings. Mistaken notions of her being just the secretary had been obliterated. She garnered acknowledgement as a contributor, leading new projects and spearheading research that tapped into her father's principles. As weeks turned into months, steady progress on her research flourished. Emma's proposal evolved, maturing from a fledgling idea into a pivotal study poised to break new ground in biomedical research. No longer was she participatory in the shadows, she was central to the dialogue, creating a narrative rich with insights gleaned from her father's unfulfilled aspirations. Her work culminated in a discovery that ultimately aligned with her father's history of exploration. The breakthrough emerged from recognizing a previously disregarded variable in data trends, illuminating a revolutionary pathway for treating the condition plaguing her father and many others. Emma harnessed the synergy of collaboration within her team, executing a series of experiments that gained traction and enthusiasm across the lab. On a brisk autumn afternoon, the day came when her findings were ready for submission to a prestigious medical journal. Emma stood in front of a group of her colleagues, presenting the collective results. Each statistic echoed her journey, individually significant yet intrinsically linked to the testimony of her father's legacy. She completed her presentation with clarity, confidence, and an unmistakable air of competence. As she concluded, her peers erupted into applause. The director, visibly impressed, approached her with a proud smile. "Emma, you've not only honored your father's legacy but established your own. Your insights will pave the way for advancements in our field." That recognition ignited pride within Emma. She had demonstrated her capability, not as an echo of her father but as an autonomous force of innovation. Reflecting on her journey, Emma recognized that her evolution was marked by resilience, unyielding curiosity, and an unwavering commitment to challenge the status quo. The fears that once loomed over her, anxiety of disappointment, of being unseen, had morphed into the armor of a confident scientist. As she left the lab that day, the golden rays of the setting sun illuminated her path forward, symbolizing the bright future that lay ahead. Emma knew she would continue to push boundaries, driven not just by ambition, but by the steadfast legacy of her father that she would always carry in her heart. She had not only conquered the barriers set before her but had truly embraced her place in the world of science. This was her moment, a moment of transformed narrative, a testament to the power of believing in oneself. The journey had forged a confidence she would carry into every future challenge, redefining not only her destiny but also that of others seeking their own path through the dark. Emma had become the blueprint for empowerment, but more importantly, she had learned that true perception comes from within. You need to subscribe now to ensure you don't miss the next exclusive emotional stories that promote personal overcoming. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm. You have the power to help elevate this narrative. Comment below with your reactions and theories about Emma's extraordinary journey, and don't wait even one more second to share this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this empowering conclusion. Your support means the world and helps our family of fans grow.